So, part 3 of our series on the book of Esther. Last week we left off and we just saw the heroine of the story, who's not become the heroine just yet. Esther is now sitting on the throne. She's ascended into this vacancy that was created by King Xerxes. He asked for a new queen. Now she has become the queen. It's been several years now that have passed. And this guy named Haman has come into a lot of power. He's among the most exalted of the king's officials, so highly exalted that the king actually instructs and orders people to bow down to Haman when he shows up. Well, Mordecai, who is Esther's basically adoptive father, it's actually her cousin, but he's raised her since her youth. Mordecai doesn't follow the command. Mordecai will not bow to Haman when he shows up. And in direct correlation to that action, now this edict has gone out because Haman, wicked as he is, doesn't find it satisfactory to only punish Mordecai. He finds out he's a Jew and wants to wipe out the entire Jewish population from the kingdom. So that's where we've left off. Haman has this wicked scheme in his heart. He's gotten it approved now by the king, so that now on one single day, 11 months hence, the Jewish people and anybody who attacks them is going to be able to do so legally, and not only that, but get paid to do it. That's the ridiculous situation that we look at here. So the situation is dire. The circumstances are dark, but we know God is still in control. Chapter 4, verse 1. When Mordecai learned of everything that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. And he came as far as the king's gate, for no one was to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. In each and every province where the command and decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and mourning rites. Some of your versions might say wailing. And many had sackcloth and ashes spread out as a bed. So when the news of this murderous edict is proclaimed, mourning ensues, which is a very reasonable response. Mordecai, it shows him here as he weeping loudly, right in the middle of the city, in the city square where all could see. So if there was any secret at this point that Mordecai was actually a Jew, that's out in the open now. It's not hidden anymore. Esther's identity still hidden, but now Mordecai the Jew is known as Mordecai the Jew. And his weeping and doing this publicly shows not only his grief with what he's heard, but also that he disapproves, obviously, of this edict that is going out. And I mean, there's possibly some other things here that I think I at least need to mention. He might be feeling personally responsible. Because remember, it was his action that led to this ultimately anyway, right? I mean, he was the one who said, I'm not going to bow down to this Haman, when it seems like every single other person, including Jewish people, were. So it was his action that led to this admittedly overreaction, but it was him deciding to do something that's led to where we find ourselves. So again, as another reminder, this situation should show you your actions affect more than just you. Maybe it's a refusal to obey a command. Maybe it's showing up late. Maybe it's speaking kindly instead of aggressively. Maybe it's choosing Coke instead of water. Like, it can be the smallest of things. But big or small, your actions go beyond just you. They affect other people. I wonder, do you actually think about that ever? Do you think about how your actions and decisions impact everybody around you? Maybe even people you've not met yet. Maybe for those of you who have children or grandchildren or want to one day, are you thinking, as you make decisions through the day, this could actually affect my ancestors? Every little thing. Like, gosh, Adam, that's heavy. No, that's just honest. The smallest of decisions, the biggest of decisions. It doesn't just stay with you. So I just wonder if you ever consider that. Or let's take it one further. Do you ever consider how your indecision affects people? Maybe it's the decision not to say anything, not to speak up, not to stand up for somebody else. I mean, who's being affected when they watch you, you know? Who's maybe stumbling over something that you do with a good conscience? Who's being affected by your obedience to the Lord? Who's being affected by your disobedience to the Lord? All of it's in play here. I'm telling you, your actions reverberate further than you think. But for whatever reason, Mordecai has made this decision to not bow down in front of Haman. And now this edict goes out, and 11 months from now, the entire Jewish race is be able to wiped out in a day. That's what's going on. So Mordecai mourns. The whole Jewish people, it seems, they mourn. It says they're fasting, weeping, wailing, putting on sackcloth and ashes. Verse 4. Then Esther's attendants and her eunuchs came and informed her. Seems like she didn't even know this had gone on. The edict goes out, and she doesn't even know why this wailing is happening. Why is Mordecai, why is my adoptive father out here doing this publicly? Like, he's going to get in trouble for this. And the queen was seized by great fear. And she sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he would remove his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hadhak from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this mourning was and why it was happening. So Hadhak went out to Mordecai in the city square in front of the king's gate. Then Mordecai just lays it out for him. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him and the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay the king's treasuries for the elimination of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict. So this shows you that he was in a high enough place to have this in his possession. He gave him a copy of the text, which had been issued in Susa, that's the capital city, for the Jews' annihilation, so that he might show Esther and inform her, and listen to this, to order her to go into the king to implore his favor and plead with him for her people. So this is a big shift in the story, guys. For years, Mordecai urged Esther to keep her identity as a Jew a secret. But right here, he says, it's time to reveal your identity. This moment is years in the making. If you can imagine Esther sitting now in the palace as queen, and she's been obedient to Mordecai for all of these years, hiding her identity, and now all of a sudden, another person comes to her, so now this person at least knows about who she is. And her dad saying, hey, it's time to tell him. It's time to tell him. After years and years of this is all she had done her whole life. And now he says, hey, after all those years of growing up with no parents, after all those years of she was being raised by him, after going through that process, do you guys remember? After being one of probably 300 or 400 virgins brought in to be tested out, after a year of beauty preparation treatments to have one night with the king, after being chosen from all of those girls to be the queen, now sitting here about 4 or 5 years after that moment, hiding her identity, and now she's supposed to reveal her identity. It's a big ask. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but sometimes God is working things together in the background for years before you actually discover the purpose in it. Sometimes God is piecing things together, setting things up years in advance before you'll be able to say, oh, now I see why. God has been working this. He's been setting it up. After sitting here now in her royal position now for these years, this opportunity is presented to her. You know, sometimes you can be doing something for a while and it feels like you're spinning your wheels. I know I'm not talking to anybody in the room. I'm probably talking to me. Sometimes I've been doing things And I'm faithful to it. I'm like, what? I'm doing this. I feel like this is the right thing to do. I feel like it's the right thing to do. And I'm seeing no traction. I'm seeing no fruit. I'm just like, I just feel like it's the right thing to do. And then all of a sudden it's oh, all right, Lord, that's what she's doing. All right. Sometimes you can be so faithful. Sometimes you can, let's say you're not being faithful. Sometimes you can just be frustrated. Sometimes you're just struggling for years. Sometimes you're trying things hit and miss for years. Sometimes you go through years of frustration and seeking and thinking, what am I doing here? And then all of a sudden in a moment, it's like, oh, this is what the Lord was doing all along. In this moment, God is showing purpose. He's revealing to her, this is why you're here. Look what I've worked together. Maybe if you wouldn't even say I was in all of it, maybe I didn't bring the hard things upon you. However you view God's providence here, Esther in this moment is being given an opportunity to step into who she's actually made to be. Years in the making. Probably frustrated, lots of them. Probably wondering, why do I have to go through this? A lot of those years. And then all of a sudden, there it is. I want to encourage you today, church. Just because you don't see God moving doesn't mean He's not doing it. Just because you don't feel Him right now doesn't mean He's not setting something up. Just because you don't perceive exactly what's going on in the spiritual does not mean that He's not lining something up for you that's going to affect far more than just your life. God is moving behind the scenes. And you never know when that moment of opportunity is going to come. So Mordecai tells Esther, this is your moment. You know, for me, I've had a few of these in my life. One that came to my mind when I was putting together the message was the year 2017. That's when the Lord led us away from where we were in South Florida, led us up here to Nashville, Tennessee, where we knew not a single person to launch a church. That's a great way to launch. Just go where you don't know anybody, right? It's hard. It's hard, but we felt the Lord in it. We did it. And there's so many good stories that I could share with you from that and His faithfulness. And I mean, like, there's a lot. But one that specifically came to mind was after we had been in that for about a year. We moved in October of 2017. We were set to launch the church in 2018. And through the process, you know, we were meeting some of you in the room, like you call yourself OGs, like y'all been here like all 5 years. And we met people through the process. Well, one of them who started on our staff was named Ron Sears, Pastor Ron. Awesome guy. And he's still helping his son plant churches in the Northeast now. That's what they're doing, reaching people in a very unreached area. If you want to go plant a church and really reach some people who've never heard of Jesus, go to the Northeast United States. Great place to go. So maybe the Lord's planting something in some of you guys' hearts even now. Maybe it'll come up in harvest years from now. And you'll be like, I think somebody said something about that years ago. So just take that if that's the Lord. I don't know. But Ron introduced me to this situation. He said, I happen to know of this situation, and I know you've been praying for years to have influence and reach people and have your life just multiplied as many people as you can find. Well, I have this connection where there's a ministry that goes out to this area in India where people don't hear the gospel. And I don't know if they're going to keep doing it. Would you be interested? I'd have said, I don't care what it costs. We want to do it. 2 weeks before the launch of our first service as a church, he comes back and he says, hey, you remember that thing? I was like, what? He said, the India thing? He said, we have an opportunity. They're not going to fund it anymore. I said, absolutely. I don't care what it costs. Might not seem significant to you, but for years and years and years, my prayer had been, Lord, would you let me please influence as many people as possible for your kingdom? I don't care how you do it. I don't care what it takes. I just want to reach more people with the gospel. And here I was praying for a large launch for our church because in my mind, that's the best way to reach people. And it's good. I want to reach more people right here in Middle Tennessee. But can I tell you, I haven't told this to many people. It's going to be on tape now, but I'll just confess this publicly and you have it on record. My prayer and hope was that we would have 800 people at our launch, just in attendance. It was a crazy ambitious goal. I like the number 8. Maybe that has something to do with it. I'm not going to say the Lord gave it to me, but that was my prayer. I wanted 800 people. When we initially had that broadcast given to us, 80,000 people every single week were exposed to the gospel of Jesus. When you've heard people talk about God will multiply it 100-fold, things of that nature, I got to personally experience my prayer being from just something I thought was rather large in a moment multiplied. Not to my glory. It sure hadn't helped us build a church in Nashville. Come on, somebody. But the leverage and impact going out from this small church in Middle Tennessee is echoing through the nations. To this day that we know of, over 24,000 people have made decisions for Jesus through that television ministry. That we know of. Who knows how many more? Talk about something that like blows you away. Now, did that come in a moment? Yes. But also, was it being cultivated for years? I think so. You never know what you're doing, what you're sowing into. Like, I don't know what's going to come next. Maybe the Lord takes it away from us. That's okay. That's his prerogative. I didn't do any of this anyway. All I did was pray and ask. And for some reason, God chose to bless us with this opportunity. And we have done our best to steward it. Here we are. I say all that to say this. God is doing things when you don't see it. But your job is to be faithful. You can pray into it. You can be ready to say yes, even if it costs you something. Because how many of you know anything good worth having usually going to take something from you? On the front end or the back, it's going to take something. Even Jesus, he gave you salvation, but he asked for your whole life. He don't want you to just sit in church and come back next week, nothing in between. He wants your life. And that's unpopular. Oh, but it's true and it's freeing when you step into it. Any agree with that? Say amen. Come on. Let's go. So Mordecai, he says, Esther, go plead for your people. It's time to reveal your identity. It's time to tell people who you are and to go do your thing. Verse 9. So Hadhak came back and reported Mordecai's words to Esther. Then Esther spoke to Hadhak and ordered him to reply to Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king in the inner courtyard, who is not summoned, he has only one law. So she says, look, you can't go talk to the king if you're not invited. And if you do, he has only one law, and it is this, that he be put to death. Unless, everybody say unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. So Esther is reluctant. She has hesitations. She says, if I go into the king and he did not ask for me to come, he can kill me on the spot. That is a legitimate concern. That's legit. It's not ungodly to have concerns. You can have concerns. Turn to somebody and say, sometimes I'm concerned about you. Yeah. It's true. I'm concerned sometimes. Sometimes. But it's okay. She's hesitant. Okay. Sometimes we envision Esther as this lady who has no fear. She's bold and she goes to every situation just undaunted, like Wonder Woman or something. But the reality is that Esther was not jumping into this role of heroine. Didn't seem like she was seeking it out. In fact, it looks like, at least at first, she was resistant. That maybe she was putting her own well-being above the well-being of a lot of other people. And that is not exactly something you look for in a superhero. Yet that's what I see on the page. Then she also says, I've not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. If you remember, she was the favorite one of all the virgins that were brought in. That's why she's queen now. But now she's saying, I haven't been brought in for 30 days. So could Esther be doubting her standing with the king now? Could she have fallen out of favor with him? 30 days. It's a long time not to see somebody that was your favorite. I mean, maybe she's not his favorite anymore. Anybody ever had a relationship that was once promising not go so good? Ever fallen out of favor with anybody? Maybe that's what she's feeling right now. I mean, what have I done? What have I done? What have I done to him? What did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? What did I do to make him mad? I don't know what was running through her head. What if he already knows? What if he already knows mine secret? What if he's about to oust me like the last queen? What if I do? What did I do? Did I make him mad? Did I disappoint him? She says, I don't know what's going through her mind. We don't know. But for whatever reason, she's now hesitant to come before this man who once showed her favor. She's reluctant. Verse 12. And they reported Esther's words to Mordecai. Stop. I know this isn't a heavy theological sentence, but I want us to notice something here. And they reported Esther's words to Mordecai. Before we go any further, I want us to notice that Mordecai right here has a decision to make. See, he instructed Esther to go to the king and plead for everybody's life. But she doesn't immediately go do it. She is reluctant. Every other time we see Esther in this story so far, she obeys what her adopted father tells her to do. She follows through. He says to do something, she listens and does it, even after she had become queen. Every single time. But now she pushes back. She hesitates. She says, I don't know, this could cost me my life. So, Mordecai has a decision to make. Will he accept that or will he not? Will he accept it? Oh, she's a big girl now. She's grown. She can make her own decisions. Will he just take it at face value? Well, I tried. I told her what she should do, but she was just not having it. That's okay. I'll move on. No, that's not what Mordecai does. He pushes back again. He comes back at her. He responds to her instead of just laying down. And when he comes back at her, he responds with words that stir her in her spirit. He responds to her with truth that is hard, but sobering. He responds to her with these words that start calling her into who she's called to be. Now, we're going to look at his exact words in a moment, but we cannot miss that when he was met with this initial resistance, he didn't just stop. I don't want you to miss that. He didn't lay down. He didn't stop at this resistance that was initial when she put up a little bit of a fight. I submit to you guys that we should not either. We should not always accept when someone expresses reluctance. Now, do not take my words out of context right here. If you're editing this later, don't just chop this part off and leave everything else. What I am not saying is that when somebody says no to something, we just keep going. I don't suggest that we violate people's integrity, their body, their human value, none of that. That is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that when someone expresses initial resistance to something, we should not always take it at face value when they're reluctant because of fear or past hurt or insecurity or because they're reluctant to take on responsibility. No. Sometimes we need to push through the resistance and call them into their purpose. Sometimes people need somebody to help push them into who they're created to be. Sometimes people need assistance to bring them along and help them to see what's inside of them. Sometimes you need a really good, loving person to look you straight in the eye and help call the gold out of you that you cannot see yourself. This is what Mordecai does for Esther. Verse 13. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, liberation and rescue will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this." That's powerful. Whew, that's good. Mordecai says a whole lot in like 3 sentences right there. So let's take it bit by bit. Let's unpack this a little bit. Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the other Jews. In other words, Esther, you are in this, whether you like it or not. You're in it. You're Jewish. And whether you act or you do not, you're part of this. Just because you got that title of queen, it ain't going to protect you. You're going to be found out, and your fate is going to be like everybody else's. Now, some here see a veiled kind of threat from Mordecai, being basically like, if you don't voluntarily reveal your identity, it's going to be done for you. Possibly. I don't know. Maybe that's insinuated. I can't say for sure. But what I can say are these are sobering words, no matter how they're interpreted. This is a life or death matter. He says, if you keep silent at this time, liberation and rescue will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. He says, if you choose to do nothing, you and your whole father's household are going to die. And then he also says, even Esther, if you choose to not say anything right now, God will still liberate his people. Liberation and rescue will arise for the Jews from another place. How could Mordecai say that? Because he believed in the promises of God. And he believed in the God who made those promises, his ability to follow through on those promises. Well, how could he say in that situation? Because he just trusts and believes. Well, how do you know the promise is coming through? Because God said so. We talked about this several weeks ago. If God says it, he will do it. I got nothing else for you. If you walk in that truth, you will find so much truth in your life. You will find such a peace when you find situations like this. You don't have to doubt anymore. Is this dangerous for me? You cease to worry about fear when you actually have a path to walk. There's no fear anymore. There's none. You say, oh, that's easy for you to say right now. You don't know my situation. If God gave you a promise, he will do it. I don't need to know your situation. Sorry, I know that's not all nice to say and all current. You're not that special. The Bible says God's no respecter of persons. That means what he's done for you, he'll do for somebody else. And what he's done for somebody else, he can do for you. So if God gave you a promise, he will do it. So even if this situation gets really terrible, can I get theological on you for a minute? Because this messes with some people, but I want to get into it for just a moment. I won't stay here too long. In these words right here, Mordecai is saying, look, even if this situation gets really bad, even if a lot of people are killed, ultimately, God will follow through on his promise. God will ultimately save his people. So without mentioning God's name at all, without bringing up any of his covenant promises, this is an immense demonstration of faith. It's utter confidence in God and in his promises. I wonder today if you have that kind of faith. To know that God's going to do what he said he's going to do, even when it don't look like it. To believe that he's going to come through on what he said, even when the situation looks really bad. This right here is a faith statement. Mordecai knows it. See, he believes this. And it also seems that he's saying God is ultimately going to save these people, even if Esther decides to be used of him or not. Now, exactly how God's sovereignty and his free will work together and play out is beyond my comprehension and my explaining abilities. I cannot answer that amazingly large life question for you, especially in the span of a few moments. But it seems to me like both are at play here. God's kingdom agenda and our choice whether we get on board with it or not. They're both here. God is sovereign. He has promises. He will see them through. We have free will. Do you want to get on board? They're both at play. I can hear Mordecai now, if he could have like an extended conversation. It's like sitting down with her, looking at her and I'd be like, Esther, look, you have an opportunity. You have this golden chance. You've been given power. You've been given influence. God could do something incredible through you right now. God could use you to save his people. But guess what? Even if you don't, God's still going to save his people. So this is your choice. But even if you get scared and back out and you're not up to it, God is still good and he'll work through somebody else. And I love how he says this. He says, who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this? It's as if he senses God moving, but he won't just say it outright, you know? It's like he's looking at this situation. He feels like the Lord's doing something, but it's just not there on the page. He doesn't say, God is doing this through you now. Go do it. He sees God's providence, his hand moving. But he won't say with certainty that God is wanting her to do it. Now, by the way, this is a great approach for how to handle spiritual things in your life. Let me just take a little sidebar here. This is a great way when handling things from the Lord. Great way to go about it. I love how he does this. Look at his words one more time. He says, who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this? If you think God is doing something, then you should convey to other people that you think God is doing something or saying something to you or is moving you to take a certain action or wants you to be used in a certain way. If you think God has a word for somebody else, you should say, I think God has a word for you. If you're not certain it's the Lord, don't act like you're certain it's the Lord. Because, I mean, you could be right. Like, I don't want to miss what the Lord's doing. If you believe it's the Lord, I want to know. I want the Lord to move in your life. This is not trying to scare you to say, don't move in the supernatural. Don't use your gifts. Don't use discernment and try to see what God is doing in the moment. No. I'm saying go for it. But don't feign like you know with certainty when it's the Lord when you do not. That leads to a whole lot of bad. That's the whole reason there's a whole group of Bible-loving Christian people who don't care for the gifts or to see them move because they've been hurt. They've seen some crazy. They've seen God misrepresented. While God is surely still moving, I know it, I've experienced it, but I used to be one of them people. I was like, y'all crazy. Gifts moving today. And now I'm like, I've seen people healed. God's healed them through my hand. What can I say? Point being, lovingly, let me be your pastor. If you think it's God, say you think it's God. You can say something like, hey, I feel like God's telling me this. Hey, I really think God has this for you. But don't act like you know with certainty if you don't know with certainty. Somebody say amen. Save us all a whole lot of heartache, please. Please, because you could be wrong. I can't imagine how many times God has been misrepresented. Could y'all even begin? I mean, like, I'll take ownership. I'm with you. I've thought things were God in the past, and looking now, I'm like, maybe I was off. Okay, nobody else. Well, I'm confessing. This is a confession for me. Thank you for forgiving me. But man, how many times God been misrepresented? It wasn't even him moving at all. It was just you ate some pizza or you had a dream, you slapped God's name on it. And everybody else is supposed to act like, oh, you heard from the Lord, so I can't even question you now. That's nonsense. Come on, y'all. Like, spiritual gifts for another time. We're going to have to. I'm not trying to shut you down. I'm just saying. Okay, anyway, so Mordecai says, who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this? So he seems to think it's the case. He thinks God's doing something. I think it's the case by looking. Now, it seems to me like too much to ignore. You know, there's just too much. It seems to me like Esther's the one who needs to be having a revelation of who put her in the palace. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you hadn't realized it yet, Esther, is it just a coincidence that you're there now? Is it just a coincidence from all the other pretty little Persian girls that you're in the spot of queen? That you have this identity and heritage in this very moment in time when your people's whole existence is threatened? Is it just coincidence? I see the Lord moving there. But the way Mordecai says it, he doesn't say it with certainty. He presents the possibility to Esther, and then Esther has to determine what she is going to do. Now, for a girl who has probably had a lot of decisions made for her in her life, this is a pretty big moment. She's got to decide. She's the queen now. She needs to still honor her father, still doesn't relieve her of that, but this is her life. Will she actually go before the king with her life in danger? Will she put other people's interests above her own? Will she get over her own insecurity or disbelief or fear and actually take that step of faith? Verse 15. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, gather all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants also will fast in the same way. And then I will go into the king, which is not in accordance with the law. And if I perish, I perish. This is the defining moment of Esther's life. This is what makes her a role model for women and men. It's her recognizing this opportunity that she has and embracing it, even though it may cost her. She says, if I perish, I perish. Now, this is not some fatalistic statement, guys. This is not like some girl that's just now resigned to death. These are the words of a woman who recognizes the danger in front of her and still goes at it anyway with conviction and courage. She says, if I perish, I perish. It's her attitude now. She's convinced. And I love that here she readies herself with fasting. I know some of you in the room were even inspired by this story to have a fast in your own life recently. What does she do before she goes into this defining moment? She fasts. This probably doesn't involve only not having food or water. It probably involves prayer, probably involves repentance, as most of fasting did in the Old Testament. But she didn't even want to do it alone. She's like, hey, I need you guys to do it with me. I'm going to do it with my group here. But I'm going to ask you to find everybody in the city who will do this with me and fast. Fast for me. And then I'll go into the king. And then I'll make my request. And it's a huge risk. Huge risk. But sometimes doing the right thing involves risk. Doing what God calls you to do takes great risk. And by risk, I mean to yourself. It could be to your very life. It could be to your finances, your reputation, your job. Fill in the blank. I can tell you one thing, it's not risk, God. His promise is going to come through. But your decision is whether you step into it or not. I was actually talking about this verse with my little boy and little girl today. And I was like, hey, just to clarify, I'm not talking about risk like you try to run out in front of a car and see if you can beat it. Not stupid risk. That's risk for risk's sake. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about taking a risk that makes no sense and then being like, God was leading me to do this. I'm talking about standing on God's promises, the conviction he puts in your heart by the Holy Spirit, standing on his word, and then stepping into it even if it looks dangerous. That's what I'm talking about. It can be risky. And I don't know what God might be calling you to risk right now. What he might be calling you to give up or, just put on the table and be like, Lord, if this don't come through, like something's going to go bad. But I do wonder what he's calling you to risk today. Wonder what he's calling you to put on the mat, And there's so many stories that I could tell right here that might inspire you, that might move your heart. But I'd rather end today like this because I don't think any story really fits this moment that I had come to my mind. I just want to ask you a question and let you ponder it. What does God have you positioned to do? What has he positioned you to do? How has he positioned you? Esther looks up and she's in a very unique situation that some could say was happen chance. But if you believe in the Lord at all, you look at that and it's screaming, this is your purpose, lady. This is what you're made for. And maybe it takes somebody on the outside looking in. Maybe when you're praying this, you actually ask somebody around you. Maybe you need that person calling things out of you that you don't even see. And maybe you ask them, you say, hey, what would you say that I'm positioned to do? You see me, you know my life. What do you think God might be calling me to? Maybe inviting somebody else into that conversation and then praying about it would be something that would help show you what God is lining you up for. But some of you right now in the position you have right now, whether it's your job, relationships you have, I don't know. But you're positioned now to do something significant for the kingdom. What is God positioning you for? How's he calling you to use your gifts or reach somebody? Or die to yourself so that other people can be elevated? I don't know what he's calling you to, but I just wonder today what your role is. Because we've got to accept God's got a divine plan. And we've also got to accept that we have a choice whether to follow him or not. So I ask one more time, what is your role in that plan? Father, in Jesus' name, I thank you for the immensity of who you are and how you are just beyond anything I can really wrap my mind around. But I also thank you that I can know that I'm seen and loved by you and you have a specific purpose for me. Lord, I pray that you would continue to reveal that to me, and I pray for every person listening in this room and watching later, that you would reveal purpose to them. That, Lord, you would make them very uncomfortable as they struggle with who they are and what you've called them to do and to be until they find it. To know your comfort in the midst of up and down seasons and just always have your peace and joy, but also to just look for that opportunity to say yes to you, to step into who you've called them to be. Lord, we pray these things boldly. And we ask that you would move in mighty ways through us, all for the building up of your body and the glory of your name. It's in Jesus Christ's mighty name we pray.